Okay, here we are over the scale. We're going to mix up our Platinum Cure silicone rubber, and there's some other things that I wanted to mention while we're working here. So basically, to begin with, when you get silicone, when you buy a gallon kit, you get it in these pails, and it's got to be sliced all the way around in order to be able to remove the pail top. And messing with razor blades or pocket knives is a self-harming hazard. So I like a right-hand pair of shears. Sheet metal shears. It makes quick work of this little scenario, and I'm not in danger of stabbing myself in the palm of my hand with a razor blade, which is something I try to avoid. Being 10 years into doing this type of thing, or 20 I guess if you count my childhood, and don't worry, I did stab myself a few times before I learned to do this, so don't feel bad if you've been just anticipating that every time you open a new kit. But we've got our base here, one component, and we've got our catalyst component here. And almost all of these say shake before using, and even if they don't, it doesn't hurt to shake. Sometimes there's solids here, and if they have settled to the bottom, and you do even one, you make one batch, you change the ratio in the catalyst container forever, and the batch is incorrectly proportioned to the amount of solid that was meant to be in there. So basically, doing it once wrong, you've ruined the whole batch. Sometimes it makes no difference, and other times it makes a huge difference. So I'll just shake our catalyst component here so that it's ready to go. And I've got this open, and I'm just going to pull the, or I'll make a little pour spout here and a breather there, just like you would in a food product. So, though it's not a food product. Like I mentioned before, we have clay left over from our matrix. I may calculate the volume or the rubber necessary based on volume, but instead I had a handy metric friend gave me. So I've weighed this clay and the other clay. I had a little over 3,000 grams in the one, a little under 3,000 grams in the other. I did the math and added, and then I multiplied by a 0.7. So by 7/10 of this weight, I'll have the rubber weight. So the rubber weighs about 7/10 of what the clay weighs. So I ended up with a 4,325 and 0.3 grams of rubber necessary. I'm going to have to do multiple batches. I have multiple clean, brand new, washed and dried mixing containers for that reason. Not only am I doing it in multiple batches, I'm only going to fill this roughly halfway. I want to leave myself room to be able to degas this rubber, which is going to boil it in a vacuum, and it's going to rise and bubble, and ultimately a lot of the mixed in air from the whipping process of combining these components will leave. If I make a batch and practically brim the container, I have no more room to let that rise and collapse, and this is a process I'll show you in a minute. But what you need to know now is I'm going to leave myself the room in the container. I'm going to leave myself about half as much of the volume left to be able to do it. Less is more, so the more room I can give myself, the easier the process will be. But since we need a lot of rubber here and I don't want to do 1,000 batches, I'm going to mix it to about half. So I'll just I'll turn on the scale as soon as I go plug it in. Turn it on. I'll put an empty container on and I'll tare it, so we're not talking about any container weight here. And to begin with, I know I'm shooting for this number overall, but I'm just going to work with round numbers. So say I said I wanted to make a little more, so I need like 4,500 grams or so of rubber. And so we're just going to talk in those terms. I'm going to start by pouring out my base. I like to hook my fingers. I don't know how much hand strength, different people have different hand strength, but I have my fingers under the edge and my thumb in this handle, and then I can kind of handily pour this with one hand, although it could be more handy. I'm going to come in and I'm looking for half of a mixed batch, so since I'm going to add catalyst, I'm not going to quite go to half with the base, and I'll just cut it off with a mixing stick. And notice how I give myself like no drippies if I can help it. I'm going to set that back down. And I'm going to keep it covered so I don't have a lot of stuff settling. Okay, and the nice part of the smooth-on components. A lot of others are like this. It's a 100 to 10 to 100, so I can just move the decimal point one place over. So if I have this much base, I just need to move the decimal, and I need 116.5 grams of catalyst, which is nice. So 116.5. If it just remember that, I'll tare it again. Leave this sit here, and I'll give it. I've added the weight of the stick. I want to be aware of all these things, but I'll give it 116.5 grams of catalyst. I don't mind waiting a little bit for a small hole. I'd rather not make the hole too large and over add by accident. So we're looking for 116.5. There we go, 116.7, tenth of a gram over what we were supposed to have, and that will be all right. So at this point, I talked about calculating the rubber based on the clay. I talked about a little bit of technical aspects to maintaining the integrity and the quality of your materials. And so now I'm going to mix this using a mixing bit in the drill, which will whip a lot of air into it. And then we're going to come back and look at degassing it once it's been mixed up with all that air. And that'll be a different segment.